Joining us now is NBC's Peter Alexander at the White House, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and the president of the Washington Strategy Group. So, Peter, what came out of the president's meetings with Macron?
Well, there were a lot of hugs and handshakes that we saw, certainly, but there's also evidence of real discord between the two in terms of their positions as it relates to the war taking place there. Macron making very clear that he wants whatever deal comes out of this situation not to be a surrender of Ukraine, that Ukraine should be able to maintain its territorial sovereignty here. President Trump, who in the past has referred to Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator, yesterday declined when asked if he would say the same about Vladimir Putin. And to give you a sense of sort of where this divide is right now, yesterday there was a critical United Nations resolution that basically would have condemned Russia for the aggression taking place in Ukraine right now. The U.S. did not side with its European allies, countries like Germany, the U.K., France, and others. Instead, it sided with Russia and North Korea and Iran and beyond. One of the other points the president made in the course of his conversation with Macron yesterday is that he believed that Russia was open to allowing NATO or European peacekeepers to be in Ukraine after an agreement. The Kremlin on that topic, Jose, overnight pushing back, saying in effect that that is unacceptable, a non-starter for them. The president's focus has been heavily, obviously, on this desire to get a rare earth minerals deal with Ukraine, basically focusing on recouping money that the U.S. had given to Ukraine for this war effort. Jose.
And so, Peter, let's talk about that, because I want to show this to our friends. In that Oval Office meeting, Macron corrected Trump after the president said Europe's support for Ukraine was a loan. Here's that moment.
Just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the U.S., loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear, okay. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that.
So,
the president
do you know
exactly
if you believe
what
that was?
Then,
yeah,
I was going to say the president basically said that's not the case. In fact, it is the case right now, as Macron detailed it. President Trump, in the course of that back and forth, repeated the false claim that the U.S. has given $350 billion, I think he said, to Ukraine and has nothing to show for it, saying that Europe had only spent about $100 billion. The real figures are nowhere near that. The U.S. has provided about $119 billion in military and humanitarian aid. Europe has given about $139 billion to this point. But Macron, for his part, he was right, saying that while some of it is in the form of loans and loan guarantees, much of that money is also in the form of grants where Europe expects nothing in return. Jose.
And so, Joel, let's talk a little bit about this whole issue at the United Nations, the U.S. siding with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, voting against the Europe-backed resolution at the UN, condemning Russia's aggression in Ukraine and calling for an immediate international withdrawal by Russia. What's the significance of this, you think, Joel?
Well, Jose, what a shameful betrayal of an American ally at the United Nations. That's the big takeaway. Yesterday's vote was probably the worst single vote by the United States at the United Nations since the war in Iraq back in 2002, when we were misled into, or when we were misleading, that is, the rest of the world, and the American people were misled by the Bush administration to invade that country. And the significance is real, because what it basically now says is that the United States is on the side of Russia in the diplomacy, and we're seeing it in real time with Richard's report, where I don't think we're hearing the White House condemning the bombing of Ukraine right now, certainly. And then even yesterday, this sort of disinformation bubble that President Zelensky spoke about, we saw in real time, where President Trump is completely wrong on the facts on American expenditures. And it really creates concerns about what the way forward is. And I don't think that the president has a realistic view that can be connected to security for Ukraine and for our European allies. And that UN vote really crystallized it yesterday.
You know, I think a lot, Joel, about, you know, with your extraordinary experience and knowledge of history and actually being a participant of much of it. You know, I think of, you know, Roger Fisher's International Conflict for Beginners when he talked about the carrot and the stick and the need for both a carrot and a stick and how to be tactical in negotiating when you're talking and dealing with trying to resolve conflict. How do you see, Joel, the resolution thesis of the Trump administration as far as carrots and sticks, but toward Ukraine?
Yeah, you know, what these resolutions can do is appropriately set the table for constructive multilateral dialogue and bilateral negotiations, if that's the way it goes, where you can see the U.S., in this case, President Trump, playing a lead role. And he says he wants to be a leader on this, but what he did not do was bring together the parties with a meaningful United Nations blessing of a diplomatic process that can be trusted, that can be verified, and that can bring the active participants together for a real solution. Instead, we got caught up in arguing with our best allies in Europe and Latin America, in Africa and Asia, and basically finger pointing at them saying, this is all polemics. And of course it is. This is diplomacy. Diplomacy is about words and converting words into real world actions. And so this diplomatic fiasco at the United Nations really should cause concern about the ability of the Trump team to actually negotiate in a manner that brings stability and security to Ukraine, which is what they say the goal is. And I think that the United Nations' role in this is essential to creating a diplomatic framework that we currently just don't have.
Yeah, I mean, but then I keep thinking about the United Nations' role in Srebrenica. You know, when thousands of people were massacred and the United Nations had representatives there and stood by. But Susan, after calling President Zelensky a dictator last week, President Trump declined to use the same term for Putin. Here's what he said. Listen to this.
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens.